I'm Marcus, and I'm 24 years old. What I'm about to tell you is how I watched my family's world crumble, and honestly, I couldn't stop smiling. Let me explain how we got here. I moved out the day I turned 18. My parents, David and Susan, always made it clear I was the disappointment compared to my older sister, Emma. She's 26 and has always been their shining star. Brand new car for graduation? Check. European vacation for college acceptance? Absolutely. Meanwhile, I worked at a hardware store through high school and got reminded constantly that I should be grateful for a roof over my head. Real warm and fuzzy stuff. For 6 years, I've been on my own. Got my own place, work in IT, built up some savings. Then 3 months ago, David kept calling, saying they needed to see me urgently. So I drove the 4 hours home. Everything seemed normal until Saturday morning. After breakfast, they sat me down. David explained that Emma had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease requiring immediate treatment. Insurance wouldn't cover it, something about experimental procedures. They needed $12,000, or Emma would have to wait 6 months, risking permanent damage. Susan was sobbing. David explained they'd borrowed from retirement, maxed their credit cards, asked everyone they knew. I was their last hope. Family comes first, right? Here's where it gets interesting. I pulled out my phone to check my account, already thinking about how I could help. That's when I saw it, $12,000 gone. Transferred at 2:30 a.m. while I was asleep on their couch. I looked at David and asked what happened. He actually seemed offended that I was questioning it, said they didn't have time to wait for me to think it over. Emma needed help immediately, and they knew I'd eventually do the right thing. So they just handled it. They'd use my fingerprint while I was unconscious to unlock my phone and access my banking app. Want to know the worst part? They made me feel like the villain for being upset. Susan went off about how I was worried about money while my sister could be dying. David called me selfish, asked what kind of person values a bank balance over his sister's life, and I apologized. Actually apologized to them for being upset about being robbed. Fast forward 3 months. I'm scrolling through social media when my youngest brother Ryan's story pops up. Ryan's 21 and still lives at home, supposedly figuring things out. The video showed Emma dancing on a yacht deck with Dubai's skyline behind her. Designer everything, champagne bottle in hand, huge smile. Next slide, Susan in oversized sunglasses with a bottle that probably cost more than my rent. Then David raising a glass with palm trees behind him. Caption, finally living like we deserve. Ryan's selfie from a penthouse suite had the caption, thanks little bro for the loan LOL, with 8 crying laughing emojis. I stared at my phone. Emma wasn't sick. No autoimmune disease. No experimental treatment. They wanted a luxury vacation and decided to steal from me to fund it. I called my bank immediately and reported fraud. The representative said they'd freeze the receiving account and investigate. She recommended filing a police report, but I had something better planned. See, when I moved out at 18, my grandfather Alfred helped me get started. He never approved of how David and Susan treated me compared to Emma. He's David's father, and he's told me multiple times he sees his own mistakes repeated. He was too hard on David growing up, and now David does the same to me while spoiling Emma. Alfred co-signed my first apartment and helped me get my first car. 2 years ago, when updating his estate planning, he made me his backup executor with healthcare power of attorney. He trusted me more than David. What David and Susan don't know, Alfred has been paying their bills for 3 years through a family trust. Mortgage, car payments, utilities, all automatically paid. He set it up anonymously because he felt guilty about how he raised David, but said he'd cut them off immediately if they ever pulled something like this. I called Alfred and told him everything. After a long silence, he asked what I wanted to do. Stop all the payments, I said. Immediately, he asked if I was sure. Once he pulled support, their bills would start bouncing within days. I was absolutely sure. By evening, every automatic payment was suspended. The next morning, 17 missed calls from Susan, 6 voicemails. The first one almost made me feel guilty. Almost. She was hysterical. Their mortgage bounced. The bank threatened repossession within 24 hours. They had no idea what happened. Each voicemail escalated, demanding I call back. David yelling about whether I'd messed with their accounts. Susan crying, then screaming, begging me to undo it. I blocked their numbers. Then my Aunt Jennifer called. She's Alfred's daughter and David's sister. Said David and Susan showed up begging for $15,000 to save the house. claiming a banking error. Jennifer almost transferred the money until she called Alfred to verify. Alfred told her everything. About the trust payments, about what they did to me, about stopping the payments. Jennifer was furious but concerned. She told me David and Susan weren't just panicking about the house. They'd put the entire Dubai trip on credit cards, thinking they'd use trust money to pay it off. Now they had $40,000 in credit card debt from one vacation, no way to make minimum payments, and facing foreclosure. Jennifer asked if I really wanted to let it go this far. Maybe we could work out a payment plan? I told her I'd think about it. But honestly, why should I help people who robbed me, lied to my face, made me apologize for being upset, and were still in Dubai partying? Then the extended family messages started. Susan's sister texting that I was tearing the family apart over money, cousins taking sides. Some supporting me, others calling me cruel. Ryan messaged directly, not apologizing, just saying I was being dramatic. That if I'd given them the money willingly, none of this would be happening. Said Emma deserves nice things, and maybe if I was more likable, they'd treat me better. So here I am. My parents are about to lose their house. They have debt they can't pay. Half my family thinks I'm vindictive. The other half thinks they're getting what they deserve. And I'm sitting in my apartment that I pay for with money I earned, wondering if I'm actually the villain here. 4 days later. The response to sharing my story was overwhelming. Most of you said to stand firm and not give them a penny. Some called me harsh, but most agreed they're getting exactly what they deserve. Here's what happened next, and buckle up, because my family apparently can't handle anything normally. David and Susan cut their Dubai trip short and flew back 2 days ago. Jennifer called to warn me they'd landed and were losing their minds. David was ranting about how I'd destroyed them, how the house was going into foreclosure, how they'd make me understand what I'd done. Jennifer suggested I at least hear them out. I asked what possible explanation could justify stealing from me. She went quiet, then admitted she didn't know, but family should communicate. Here's my mistake. I didn't change my locks. Never gave them a key to my apartment, so I didn't think I needed to. Thursday afternoon, I came home from work and found David sitting on my couch, just sitting there like he owned the place. He'd told my building superintendent I'd been in an accident and he needed important documents for the hospital. The super gave him access. I was furious. Told him it was breaking and entering. I could call the cops right now. David stood up. Go ahead, but maybe listen to what I have to say first. Susan came out of my bathroom. She'd been hiding there the whole time. She looked exhausted and started talking before I could tell them to leave. She said I'd completely misunderstood what happened. They were celebrating that Emma's diagnosis was wrong, and they'd already spent non-refundable money, so they decided to make the trip anyway. Insane lie. Ryan's Instagram literally said, "Thanks for the loan." I pointed this out. Susan said Ryan was just joking, that he has terrible humor, that I'm sensitive about Emma getting more attention. David jumped in, saying the problem is I've spent my whole life being jealous of Emma instead of happy for her success. That they tried to raise me right, but I turned into someone bitter and resentful who can't stand seeing others happy. The reason they've always done more for Emma is because she appreciates it and doesn't throw it back in their faces, like I do. I asked what I've ever thrown back. He brought up my high school graduation. They'd offered to take me anywhere for dinner, and I chose somewhere casual instead of the nice restaurant they took Emma to. That showed them I didn't value their efforts. I reminded him he told me to pick somewhere affordable because money was tight. He said I should have known he didn't mean it. It was a test to see if I'd insist on something nice. This is the insanity I've dealt with my entire life. Everything's a test. I'm failing without knowing I'm being tested. Susan tried a different approach. Talked about how hard things have been financially. David's hours were cut 2 years ago. They've been struggling. When they saw they had access to money, they thought they could take a loan against it and pay it back before anyone noticed. Asked why they didn't just ask me for a loan. She said they didn't think I'd say yes because I'm so careful with money, that I've never understood that sometimes you need to live a little, that they were trying to teach me family is more important than bank accounts. The circular logic made my head hurt. They stole because they knew I wouldn't give them money. Also, it's my fault for being responsible. Actually, they weren't even stealing, just borrowing. Also, I deserved it for being too careful with finances. Then David told me what they wanted. Tell Alfred to turn the trust payments back on. Drop the fraud claim so their account gets unfrozen. Loan them another $8,000 to cover immediate bills while they figure out a payment plan. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. They were delusional if they thought I'd give them another cent. David's face went red. Said I was making a huge mistake. If I let them lose the house, Emma and Ryan would have to move in with me since they couldn't afford their own places. Did I really want that responsibility? That's when it clicked. They weren't just panicking about themselves. They were panicking because if they lost the house, Emma and Ryan had nowhere to go. And the house, worth about $400,000, was their only real asset. Foreclosure meant losing all that equity. I told them that wasn't my problem. I didn't force them to steal from me or rack up $40,000 in vacation debt. Susan started crying, saying I was punishing Emma and Ryan for something they didn't do. I pointed out Ryan was literally bragging about scamming me on social media. She said he's young and doesn't understand. Consequences yet. He's 21. David switched tactics. Said if I wouldn't help, I'd have to live with being the son who let his parents become homeless. Everyone in the family would know I had the power to stop it and chose not to. I'd spend the rest of my life being known as the person who valued money over family. I told them to leave immediately or I was calling the police for real. David said fine, but I'd regret this. Susan grabbed my arm, begging me to just think about it. To consider they're my parents and they made a mistake, but they love me and need me right now. I pulled away and opened the door. They left, but David stopped in the hallway. Said I had until Monday to change my mind. That's when the bank takes the house. After Monday, whatever relationship we had would be over permanently because he can't forgive a son who does this to his family. After they left, I tore into the superintendent for giving them access. He apologized, said David was very convincing. I told him to call me first to verify any future access requests. He agreed and offered to change my locks for free. Yesterday, I talked to Alfred about the break-in. He was furious. Didn't realize David had stooped to breaking and entering. I asked about turning the trust payments back on. Alfred told me something I didn't know. The trust isn't unlimited. He set it up 3 years ago with $200,000 specifically to help David and Susan get stable without them knowing it was him. In 3 years, they've burned through almost all of it because they never actually fixed their financial situation, just spent knowing the trust would cover bills. There's only about $15,000 left. Even if Alfred wanted to turn payments back on, there's not enough to cover their mortgage and credit minimums for more than a couple months. Alfred said he feels responsible for enabling them to avoid facing reality too long. He thought he was helping, but really just postponing this exact situation. He asked what I wanted him to do with the remaining trust money. I said save it. If they lose the house and need help with an actual apartment or something necessary, maybe the money could go toward that. But not to bail them out of their own mess. Alfred agreed, but warned me to prepare myself. Desperate people do desperate things. Watch my bank accounts carefully. Maybe warn my workplace about a family situation in case they show up there. I thought he was paranoid. Then this morning I woke up to texts from Emma. About 30 messages starting at 3 a.m., most of her yelling about how I'm ruining her life. How she had to cancel plans with friends because she can't afford to go out since David and Susan can't give her money. How it's not fair I get to live in my own apartment with savings while she's stuck at home with stressed parents. Then she said something that made my blood boil. She knows I've always been jealous that she's prettier and more successful, and that our parents actually like spending time with her. That I'm probably happy to see her brought down to my level for once. Emma has never had to struggle. She's 26, doesn't work because she's building a lifestyle brand on social media, lives rent-free with parents who pay for everything, including car insurance and phone. Never paid rent, never held a job for more than 3 months, zero concept of actual financial struggle. I didn't respond. Then Ryan started texting too. His messages were different, said he gets that I'm mad, but I need to understand David and Susan have always struggled to make everyone happy. They spent so much on Emma's needs over the years that they didn't have much left for me. But that wasn't favoritism, just how things worked out. He said families sacrifice for each other, and me cutting them off proves I was never really part of the family anyway. The cognitive dissonance is staggering. They can't see that everything they're saying proves exactly why I'm done with them. But here's the newest problem. Jennifer called this morning crying. David and Susan showed up at her house last night trying to guilt her into refinancing her own house to loan them money. They said if she doesn't help, they'll lose everything and it'll be her fault for not helping family. Jennifer told them no. They apparently lost it, yelling about how Alfred poisoned me against them, and now I'm poisoning her too. Jennifer's worried they're going to target other family members and cause a huge rift. She asked if there was any compromise I'd be willing to make to keep the peace. I told her I already made my decision, and I'm not backing down. She said she understands, but I should know David and Susan are telling everyone I'm mentally unstable and having some kind of breakdown. That I was so angry about the misunderstanding. With the money that I've gone scorched earth on the whole family. Some relatives are starting to believe them, so now I'm dealing with my parents trying to turn the entire extended family against me. Both my siblings blaming me for their problems, and the deadline for losing the house in 3 days. I talked to a lawyer yesterday just to make sure I'm protected legally. She said the fraud claim with the bank is solid. They definitely used my biometrics without permission, which is illegal. She suggested I might want to file a police report anyway, just to have it on record, even if I don't press charges immediately. Part of me wonders if I should file that report. The other part knows that if I do, my family will completely explode and I'll be cut off from everyone forever. But honestly, maybe that's not the worst thing. Monday's coming fast. The house goes into foreclosure if they don't catch up on payments plus fees. David and Susan have made it clear they think this is entirely my fault and responsibility to fix. After the deadline, Monday was chaos. Let me break down everything that went wrong. I filed the police report Sunday night. After they literally broke into my apartment, I figured I needed the paper trail. The officer was understanding, said financial abuse from family members is more common than people think, and using someone's biometrics without consent is absolutely illegal. He gave me a case number and said the fraud unit would follow up within a week. Monday morning, my boss pulled me aside before I even sat down. Asked if everything was okay because David had called Friday afternoon claiming there was a medical emergency and he needed to reach me urgently. My boss had given him my direct work number, thinking it was legitimate. I explained there was no emergency, that I was dealing with a family situation, and if anyone from my family called again, they shouldn't be given any information or transferred to my line. My boss looked uncomfortable but agreed. Then he asked if this would affect my work performance because he'd noticed I seemed distracted lately. I assured him it wouldn't, but I was furious that David had brought my workplace into this. Around 11, my work phone rang. It was Susan. She started talking immediately, saying we needed to meet for lunch so she could explain things I didn't understand. I told her I was at work and hung up. She called back 3 times. I stopped answering, but then my cell started ringing. Different numbers I didn't recognize. This went on for 45 minutes, different numbers calling both my work line and cell. Finally, I answered one. It was Emma crying, saying David and Susan were at the bank trying to work something out, but the bank wouldn't talk to them because of the fraud investigation I triggered. She said they needed me to call the bank and tell them it was all a misunderstanding so they could access their account again. If I did that one thing, they could probably save the house because they had friends willing to help with a short-term loan, but they needed account access to move money around. I asked Emma why she thought I'd help after everything. She said because I'm her brother and she's never done anything to me personally. So why am I punishing her for David and Susan's mistakes? That she's going to end up homeless because of me. I told her. She's 26 and maybe it's time she got a job and her own place instead of relying on our parents for everything. She called me names and hung up. At lunch, I turned off both phones and went to the gym just to escape. When I turned them back on at 1 p.m., there were 63 missed calls and 42 text messages from various family members, most from people I barely know, cousins I haven't talked to in years, Susan's high school friends, random relatives, all saying basically the same thing about how family sticks together and I should reconsider. But there were also messages from Jennifer and Alfred. Jennifer said David and Susan showed up at Alfred's house Monday morning before the bank opened, and there was a huge confrontation. Alfred told them he wasn't giving them money, and they needed to take responsibility for their choices. David apparently said harsh things about Alfred being a terrible father who always favored other people over his own son, and this was Alfred's revenge for David not living up to his expectations. Alfred's message just said to call when I could. I called during my afternoon break, and he sounded tired. He told me the confrontation got heated and ended with David saying he never wanted to speak to Alfred again. That after everything Alfred had done to help them over the years, cutting them off proved he never actually cared about his son or grandchildren. Alfred said he's made peace with it, but wanted me to know David and Susan are now completely financially cut off from everyone in the family who has money. Jennifer won't help them. He won't help them. And his other kids, David's siblings, have all said they're staying out of it after hearing what they did to me. That should have been the end of Monday's chaos, but it wasn't. I got home from work around 6:30 and found Emma sitting in the hallway outside my apartment door. She'd been waiting over an hour. She looked awful, like she'd been crying all day. The second she saw me, she started talking about how the house was definitely going into foreclosure now, because they missed the deadline and couldn't come up with the money even with the grace period. Susan was having a complete breakdown, locked herself in her bedroom and wouldn't come out. David was driving around refusing to answer his phone. Ryan was freaking out because he had nowhere to go, and neither did she. She asked if she could stay with me temporarily while she figured things out. I told her no. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. Started saying I can't be serious. Where's she supposed to go? She doesn't have money for a deposit or first month's rent. I reminded her she just spent however many thousands in Dubai partying on money stolen from me. She said that wasn't her fault. David and Susan paid for the trip. She didn't know where the money came from. Another lie. Ryan's Instagram literally said, "Thanks for the loan." I pointed this out and she said, "Ryan's an idiot who posts stupid things for attention, and I'm taking it way too seriously. That even if David and Susan did something wrong, she and Ryan shouldn't have to suffer for it." I asked her why she never got a job or saved any money in her entire adult life. She said she's been trying to build her social media presence, and that takes time and effort. It's not like she's been doing nothing. I looked at her account right there in front of her. She has 3,000 followers and her last post got 42 likes. She's not building anything. She's just posting selfies and calling it a career. Emma got angry, said I've always been jealous of her and that's why I can't stand to see her happy. That David and Susan gave her opportunities because she actually appreciated them and made something of herself, while I just disappeared and nursed grudges. I asked her what exactly she's made of herself. She said she's living her life on her own terms instead of being a boring office drone like me. This is the sister I was supposedly willing to give $12,000 to save. Someone who thinks having a job and supporting yourself makes you a boring drone. I told her she needed to leave and she refused. Said she wasn't going anywhere until I agreed to let her stay for at least a few weeks. I went into my apartment and she tried to follow me in. I physically blocked the door and told her if she didn't leave, I'd call building security. She called me heartless and said she'd remember this, that when she makes it big and I come asking for help, she'll treat me exactly how I'm treating her now. She finally left around 8 p.m., and I spent the rest of the night dealing with more messages from family members who'd heard I refused to let Emma stay with me. Got called selfish, cruel, vindictive, and my personal favorite, a disgrace to the family name. Tuesday morning, I woke up to an email from my bank. The fraud investigation was complete. They'd determined the transaction was unauthorized. They were crediting the $12,000 back to my account and permanently closing David and Susan's account with them. The email also mentioned that because this was identity theft involving biometric fraud, it had been reported to the credit bureaus with flags on the account to prevent future unauthorized access. I honestly felt relief seeing that money back. It had been 3 months of knowing it was gone, but then I started thinking about what this meant for David and Susan. With their main bank account closed, they can't receive direct deposits or make automatic payments. They'll have to open a new account somewhere else. But with fraud flags on their record, that's going to be difficult. Most banks won't take you if you have recent fraud flags, even if you were the perpetrator, not the victim. I called Alfred to let him know the bank had resolved things in my favor. He was quiet for a long time, then said he needed to tell me something he'd been thinking about. He said he's been reflecting on how he raised David, and he thinks he understands now why David turned out this way. Alfred was always pushing him to be more successful, make more money, climb higher socially. David internalized that pressure, and when he couldn't live up to it, he started projecting those same expectations onto his own kids. But instead of pushing all his kids equally like Alfred did, David decided to pour everything into Emma because she was easier to mold into what he wanted. She's conventionally attractive, charismatic in a superficial way, and willing to go along with whatever makes her life comfortable. I reminded him too much of Alfred's criticism, so he wrote me off early and focused on creating the perfect golden child with Emma. Alfred said he feels responsible for creating this dynamic and that he's sorry I got caught in the crossfire. I told him it's not his fault David chose to be a bad parent. That generational trauma isn't an excuse for stealing from your own kid. We talked about what happens next. Alfred said David and Susan are going to have to figure out living arrangements soon because the bank will start eviction proceedings within 30 days. He's heard through Jennifer they're trying to find someone who will let all 4 of them stay together temporarily. But nobody wants to take in a family of 4 adults who are all unemployed or underemployed. Wednesday, I got a text from Ryan saying he needed to talk to me in person. Could we meet somewhere neutral? Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a park near my apartment Thursday afternoon. Ryan looked different, less cocky than usual. He started by saying he knows I'm mad at him for the social media post and that he was being immature. He didn't really understand the situation when he made that post. Just thought it was funny. Asked him how he didn't understand when David and Susan literally told me in front of him they were taking money for Emma's medical treatment. He said he wasn't there for that conversation. He was at a friend's place that weekend and only came home Sunday after I'd left. David and Susan told him they'd gotten a loan from me for Emma's treatment. But then Emma told him the diagnosis was wrong and they decided to use the money for a family trip instead. He thought I'd agreed to it. I asked why he'd think I agreed to $12,000 being used for a vacation. He said because David and Susan told him I was always talking about how they should take a nice trip and spend time together as a family. That this was partially my idea and I'd offered to help make it happen. The manipulation is insane. They lied to Ryan about what happened so he'd be on their side if things went wrong. I showed him my bank statement on my phone, the transfer at 2:30 a.m. Asked him if that looks like someone willingly giving money. He stared at it for a long time, then said he didn't know they'd done it that way. Ryan said he's been thinking about a lot of things the past few days. That living at home has been comfortable, but maybe too comfortable. That he's 21 and has been coasting because David and Susan never pushed him to do anything. He said watching everything fall apart has made him realize he needs to get his life together. And he's been looking at job postings and thinking about moving in with friends who have space. I asked why he was telling me this. He said because he knows I've been on my own since 18 and wanted to know how I did it, how I managed to move out and build a life when our parents clearly didn't prepare either of us for independence. I gave him practical advice about budgeting, finding roommates, entry-level jobs. He actually seemed to be listening. Then he asked if I thought there was any way to fix things with the family. I told him honestly that I don't think there is. That David and Susan have proven they see me as a resource to exploit, not as their son. That Emma has made it clear she thinks I owe her something just for existing. That the only way forward for me is to stay away from all of them. Ryan said he understands, but that it makes him sad because we used to be close when we were kids. I don't remember us being that close, but I didn't argue. He left and I haven't heard from him since. Last night, Jennifer called crying again. David and Susan showed up at her house Wednesday night with all their belongings packed in their cars. They told her the bank had started formal eviction proceedings and they needed somewhere to stay for a few days while they looked for an apartment. Jennifer let them stay in her guest room but said it can only be temporary. She doesn't have space for 4 adults long term. David and Susan are apparently telling Jennifer this is all going to work itself out, that they have plans to get back on their feet. But Jennifer says she can see they're in complete denial about how bad their situation is. They have no income except David's part-time work that barely covers food, $40,000 in credit card debt, no savings, and now nowhere to live. Jennifer asked if there's anything at all I'd be willing to do to help them get into a small apartment or something. I told her the same thing I've told everyone else. They made their choices and these are the consequences. She said she understands, but she's worried about what happens when they run out of family members willing to house them temporarily. So that's where things are now. David and Susan are essentially homeless, couch surfing. My siblings are facing reality that their comfortable setup is over. Half my extended family hates me, and I'm sitting here with my $12,000 back in my account, trying to figure out if I feel good about any of this. Honestly, I'm not sure I do feel good. I don't regret my actions. They deserved consequences. But watching it all implode is heavier than I expected. The people who said I should feel nothing but satisfaction were wrong. It's more complicated than that. But I also know that if I give in now and help them, nothing will change. They'll see it as confirmation. They can do whatever they want to me, and I'll eventually cave. So I'm holding firm. Even though it sucks, what I didn't expect was what happened next. I got served with papers yesterday. My parents are suing me. The final chapter. All right, this is probably my last update. I'm exhausted from this whole situation and need to move on with my life. So, the lawsuit. I read through the papers, and it was even more ridiculous than I expected. They're suing me for intentional infliction of emotional distress and claiming I had a verbal contract to provide them financial support that I breached. They want the $12,000 back, plus another $30,000 for damages to their credit and loss of their home. I took the papers to my lawyer, and she actually laughed when she read them. Said the case was completely frivolous. Verbal contracts for family loans are almost impossible to prove, and the emotional distress claim was nonsense considering they're the ones who committed fraud against me. She said we could get it dismissed pretty quickly, but it would still cost me a few thousand in legal fees to file the response and potentially show up to court. The really infuriating part, David and Susan clearly know they're not going to win. My lawyer said this type of lawsuit is usually filed just to harass someone and force them to spend money on legal defense. It's a spite move. They're burning money on lawyer fees they can't afford just to make my life difficult. I filed the response through my lawyer. Then I did something I'd been putting off. I called Susan directly. I know many people told me to never contact them again, but I needed to say some things to her face, and I needed her to actually listen instead of talking over me. She answered on the first ring, started immediately with how glad she was I called, that she knew I'd come to my senses eventually, that we could work this all out if I just dropped the fraud claim and helped them get back on their feet. I cut her off and told her we needed to meet in person. She agreed immediately and suggested a restaurant for dinner. I said no, somewhere public but not a restaurant. We settled on a park near Jennifer's house where they're staying. I met them Saturday afternoon. All four of them showed up. David, Susan, Emma, and Ryan. I'd specifically said just my parents, but they brought backup anyway. We sat at a picnic table, and David started talking before anyone else could. Said they needed to clear the air about some misunderstandings, and if we all just communicated properly, we could fix this family crisis I'd created. I told him there was no misunderstanding. They stole from me, lied to me, then tried to manipulate me into feeling guilty about their own choices. Susan jumped in saying that's not what happened. They borrowed money they fully intended to pay back, and I overreacted by freezing accounts and cutting off the trust. That if I'd just been patient and trusted them, none of this would have happened. I asked her how I was supposed to trust people who used my fingerprint while I slept to steal money. She said steal is such a harsh word. That family members help each other out and don't keep score. That she and David spent hundreds of thousands raising me and never asked me to pay them back for that. I pointed out that's called being a parent. That's their legal obligation, and it doesn't entitle them to commit fraud. David said I was being deliberately difficult and legalistic about something that should be handled within the family. That involving banks, lawyers, and police was me escalating things beyond what was necessary. I asked what the appropriate family response was to being robbed. He said I shouldn't think of it as being robbed. I should think of it as a forced loan that I'd have gotten back eventually. Emma decided to contribute. Said I was punishing her and Ryan for something David and Susan did, and that wasn't fair. That she's been applying for jobs, apparently her first time ever looking for work at 26, and it's really hard. And I should understand since I've had jobs before. She said if I really cared about her, I'd help her get an apartment so she could start building her own life instead of being stuck with our parents. Asked why she thought I'd help her after she spent weeks sending me messages calling me jealous and bitter. She said that was just because she was stressed and didn't mean it. that I should be the bigger person since I'm clearly doing better financially than anyone else in the family. Ryan was quieter than the others. He asked if there was any scenario where I'd consider helping them at all. I said no. I'd made my decision and was sticking to it. He nodded and didn't push further. David changed tactics. Said the lawsuit wasn't his idea. Their lawyer suggested it as a way to protect their legal interests. But if I agreed to drop the fraud claim and help them settle their debts, they'd drop the lawsuit. We could call it even and move forward. I told them I wasn't dropping anything and their lawsuit was going to get thrown out anyway. Susan started crying. Real crying this time. Susan started crying. Real crying this time. Not the manipulative kind from before. She said they're sleeping on an air mattress in Jennifer's guest room. That Jennifer made it clear they can only stay 2 more weeks and they don't know where they're going to go. That David's been applying for full-time work, but nobody will hire him at his age for the kind of money they need. That their credit is destroyed and no landlord will rent to them. She asked me if I really wanted my parents to end up in a shelter or living in their car. Told her those consequences are because they spent $40,000 they didn't have on a vacation instead of paying their bills. That they made choices and now they're dealing with the results. She said I was cruel and that she didn't raise me to be this cold. I lost it at that point. Told her she didn't raise me at all. That she spent my entire childhood focusing on Emma and treating me like an inconvenience. That the only reason I turned out okay is because I learned early not to depend on them for anything. That everything I have I built myself while they actively made my life harder. David stood up and got in my face. Said I was rewriting history to make myself the victim. That they gave me food and shelter and education and I was spitting on all of it. I stood up too and told him he gave me the legal minimum required to not get arrested for neglect. That providing basics isn't the same as being a good parent. He said I've always had a victim mentality and that's why I never achieved anything notable like Emma has. I actually laughed at that. Asked him what exactly Emma has achieved besides posting selfies and spending other people's money. Emma started yelling at me and David told her to calm down. Susan tried to get control of the situation. Said we were all saying things we didn't mean because emotions were high. That we should take a break and try this again in a few days when everyone was calmer. I told her there wasn't going to be another meeting. That this was me giving them closure by explaining exactly why I was done with all of them. I told them I'd spent 6 years building a life they had no part of. That I had a job I was good at, an apartment I could afford, and savings I'd earned. That none of that came from them and they had no claim to any of it. That their emergency wasn't my responsibility and their financial crisis wasn't my problem to solve. David said if that's how I felt, then I wasn't his son anymore. That he was done trying to maintain a relationship with someone who clearly hated his own family. I told him that was fine with me. Susan grabbed his arm and told him not to say things like that, but he shook her off. Emma was crying now too, and Ryan just sat there staring at the ground. David said one more thing before I left. You'll regret this someday. When you're alone and you realize money can't replace family, you'll understand what you threw away. I looked at him and said, I've been alone since I was 18, and I've been happier without you than I ever was with you. The difference is, now I don't have to pretend anymore, and I walked away. 3 months later. It's been 3 months since that meeting in the park, and I wanted to give one final update on where everything stands. The lawsuit was dismissed exactly like my lawyer said it would be. David and Susan didn't even show up to the hearing. The judge took one look at the case, called it frivolous, and threw it out. My lawyer fees ended up being around $3,000, which hurt, but it was worth it to have it officially done. David and Susan ended up finding a small 2-bedroom apartment about an hour away from where they used to live. From what Jennifer tells me, Alfred quietly used some of the remaining trust money to cover their deposit and first month's rent. Not because they deserved it, but because he didn't want them actually homeless. They're both working now. David got a full-time job at a warehouse and Susan is working retail. It's a far cry from the lifestyle they were trying to maintain, but they're surviving. Emma and Ryan both moved out. Emma is living with 3 roommates in a cheap apartment and finally got a job. She's working at a coffee shop. Jennifer says she complains constantly about how hard it is and how unfair life is, but she's paying her own rent for the first time in her life. Her social media has quieted down significantly. Last I heard, she'd stopped posting about her lifestyle brand and just shares occasional photos now. Ryan actually reached out to me about a month ago. He got a job in retail and is living with 2 friends from high school. He sent me a long text apologizing for the Instagram post and for not seeing what was really going on. Said he's been working on understanding the family dynamics better and realizes now how differently I was treated growing up. He asked if we could maybe grab coffee sometime, no pressure. I thought about it for a while and eventually agreed. We met up 2 weeks ago. It was awkward at first, but we talked for over 2 hours. He's genuinely trying to build his own life and seemed interested in actually having a relationship with me, separate from the rest of the family. I'm cautiously optimistic about staying in touch with him. He's young, and unlike Emma, he seems willing to actually learn and grow from this situation. I haven't spoken to David, Susan, or Emma since that day in the park. They've stopped trying to contact me. Jennifer says David occasionally mentions me, usually to say something about how I abandoned the family, but mostly they just don't talk about me anymore, which is exactly what I wanted. The extended family drama has mostly died down. Some relatives still think I was too harsh, but most people have moved on to their own lives. The ones who matter, Alfred and Jennifer, have been incredibly supportive. Alfred and I have gotten closer through all of this. We have lunch every couple of weeks, and he's told me more about his own regrets with how he raised David. I've learned a lot about generational patterns and cycles of dysfunction. It's helped me understand that while David's childhood explains his behavior, it doesn't excuse it. And more importantly, I don't have to sacrifice my own well-being to fix problems I didn't create. As for me, I'm doing well, really well actually. Work is going great. I got a promotion last month with a significant raise. I'm saving more than ever. I've started going to therapy to process everything that happened and work through the complicated feelings about cutting off most of my family. My therapist has helped me understand that guilt is a normal response, but it doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. I've also realized something important. I don't miss them. I thought I would. I thought there would be this huge void or constant sadness. But instead there's just peace, relief. Like I've been carrying a heavy weight my entire life and finally set it down. I don't wake up to manipulative texts anymore. I don't dread phone calls. I don't have to brace myself for criticism or compare myself to Emma. I don't have to watch my parents pour love and resources into my siblings while treating me like an afterthought. I'm just free. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how everything went down, if I wish I'd handled it differently, been more forgiving, given them another chance. The answer is no. Could I have given them money? Sure. Could I have dropped the fraud charges? Technically, yes. Could I have let them continue taking advantage of me while making me feel guilty about it? Absolutely. But here's what I've learned. Some people will take everything you give them and still blame you for not giving more. Some people will never see you as anything other than a resource to exploit. And some people, even parents, don't deserve a place in your life just because you share DNA. I spent 18 years trying to earn their love and approval. 6 more years feeling guilty for not being good enough. And 3 months watching their world collapse because of their own choices. And you know what? I'm not the villain in this story. I never was. They stole from me. They lied to me. They tried to manipulate me into believing I was the problem. And when I stood up for myself, they tried to destroy me through lawsuits and family gossip. But I survived it. I'm thriving, actually. My apartment is paid for with money I earned honestly. My savings are intact and growing. My conscience is clear. And my life is finally, completely my own. To anyone reading this who's dealing with toxic family members, you don't owe anyone access to you just because they're related to you. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep others warm. And choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. I chose myself, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat. That's my story. Thanks for coming along for the ride. I'm closing this chapter of my life now and moving forward. Marcus, signing off. 3 years later, Marcus is still thriving. He's in a healthy relationship, has been promoted twice more, and maintains a good relationship with his grandfather Alfred, his aunt Jennifer, and his brother Ryan. He hasn't spoken to his parents or Emma since that day in the park, and he's never looked back. Sometimes the family you choose is better than the family you're born into, and sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do.